This is the Comics Alternative, episode 203, reviews of The Black Monday Murders, number 1, Kingsway West, number 1, Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth, number 1, and Superfuckers Forever, number 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And this week, Andy and I are going to look at 4 new number 1 issues. We're going to begin with Jonathan Hickman and Tomm Coker's The Black Monday Murders. After that, we're going to look at Greg Pak and Mirko Colak's Kingsway West. And then we're going to turn to the more comedic side of the show with Joshua Hale Fialkov and Tony Fleece's Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth. And then we're going to wrap up with James Kachalka's Superfuckers Forever, number 1. But before we get into those discussions, we want to let all of you guys know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off the cover price if you pre-order. For all of the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every month, you're going to find some unbelievable specials. Sometimes those specials will be at 45% off cover price, sometimes 50% off cover, but often you can find discounts that go higher than that.
That's right, and this month you can get the 3rd issues of the series that we're going to be talking about today. Black Monday Murders and Kingsway West are both 40% off, and Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth, and Superfuckers Forever, number 3, are 35% off.
That's right. You find great discounts every single month at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, we have a lot to discuss on this week's show, and in fact, we're doing something a little different. Usually on our regular weekly review shows, we try to look at 1 book and then 2 number 1 issues. But this week, we decided to look at just the number 1 issues because there are a number of recent titles that have come up that we've wanted to talk about, but we haven't gotten around to. Some of these have been out 2 or 3 weeks, but we wanted to get around to talking about those.
Yep.
Yeah. Before we do have some listener email to share with our audience.
Yes, we do.
Mail time.
Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
The other day, after our last week's episode, in fact, we got an email from Bob Hodges, and if that name sounds familiar, well, Bob Hodges has been listening to the Comics Alternative for quite a while, and he has sent us messages in the past, but most notable, he was, I think, the very first individual to win a drawing when we used to do that a few years ago on those on-location episodes at Lone Star and then later at Collected. We don't have giveaways anymore, but he was, I think, the very first person to win a prize.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. But he sends us an email. He says, folks, just writing in with a few small notes. While looking back through my emails, I realized that almost all of my emails to the Comics Alternative involve Ed Brisson. I was sad to hear of your last on-location show that The Violent was ending, and it triggered my residual guilt for being a trade waiter on that and most other series. But I did look around Brisson's Twitter account, and it appears he plans to go to the Kickstarter route for the 2nd volume of The Violent, something to keep an eye out for. He also says that I'm really grateful for the Eurocomic series. And then on the last review show, the series Sons of Anarchy was brought up. I watched all 7 seasons of that dreadful Hamlet remake, one of my least favorite Shakespearean tragedies. I still don't understand why I did that, but I make it my mission to warn others. Watching the 7-season run did have a salutary effect of breaking my completionist tendencies in reading and watching. I'm now much less likely to finish a TV series or comic series if I dislike it, and yes, I know Brisson does the Sons of Anarchy comic. Ironies abound. I hope all the Comics Alternative hosts are well. Thanks for the regular and informative shows. Bob.
Yep, thanks, Bob. And I guess we'll agree to disagree about Sons of Anarchy and Hamlet.
Yeah. Well, not having watched Sons of Anarchy, as I mentioned last week, I can't speak to that. Hamlet, though, yeah, I'm with you, Andy, on that. It's definitely not my least favorite of the tragedies.
No, I can't even think of what my least favorite of the tragedies would be.
No.
Is The Merchant of Venice a tragedy? I can't remember if that gets counted or not.
Maybe. We can count it for today's purposes.
Okay.
Well, from Shakespearean talk into the comics, let's begin with the first title that we're going to be discussing this week, and that is The Black Monday Murders, written by Jonathan Hickman with art by Tomm Coker, and this comes out from Image Comics.
Yeah, that's right. And The Black Monday Murders, as one can probably imagine if they're used to Jonathan Hickman's work, is already set up in this first issue to be a very complex plot. This involves I guess an organization, what is ostensibly a bank, but is really kind of a front for a much larger, powerful both financially and supernaturally organization that appears to in some ways control the market, but also the stock market, but also be subject to it. So the book opens up in 1929 with the famous stock market crash, and we see how this organization has to respond based on whatever deal they made to get where they are. Has to respond to the crash and adjust to it before they can continue their profitable ways.
Right.
And then later we get into the present day, in which there is a new mystery involving one of the members of this organization getting murdered.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned the word murder. Let's tell our listeners that we had at one point thought about waiting to discuss the first issue of Black Monday Murders, or just, I guess, Black Monday Murders in general, until October, because you and I, Andy, are planning on doing maybe a 2-episode special focus on recent crime comics. Mm-hmm. And this is one that could definitely fit into that. But the thing about Black Monday Murders is, well, one, we really wanted to discuss this sooner rather than later, and I think especially you, and for good reason. But also, this is something that you could categorize not just as a crime comic, but also it has that fantastical conspiratorial side to it. So is it a crime comic? Might it become something a little different that maybe deviates quite significantly from the crime genre? In other words, this title is more of a genre combining than a straight-laced genre. And, let's say a more down the road recent crime comic would be something like Control, which is a title that we discussed a couple of months back. This one kind of blends and bends genres, and I think we could say the same thing for the next title we're going to be discussing, Kingsway West.
Yeah.
And in fact, you could say with all 4 of the titles that we're looking at this week that this is something like a genre smorgasbord.
Yes, sure.
Yeah. But yeah, there are definitely the criminal crime elements to Black Monday Murders, but it's the kind of dark forces, conspiratorial side of Black Monday Murders that makes it so compelling. And another word that you pointed out is, I think you used the word complexity or something like that. Yeah, of all the 4 titles we're discussing this week, this is the most dense of the number 1 issues. Now, part of this density comes to the fact that, I mean, this is a big-ass comic. This is well over 50 pages for a number 1 issue, and that's impressive. And Hickman tends to do that with his first issues of some of the titles he's come up with, especially with Image. But even if this were a normal-sized comic, if things were condensed a little bit, God, I mean, this is one of those titles that I had to keep going back to look at a previous page or two just to make sure that I'm taking it all in. I mean, because there is a lot to take in here.
Yeah, it is a long and dense work. I'm not even sure how many pages this first issue is. But one of the things that I appreciate about it is, first of all, its length. And then looking at upcoming issues of Black Monday Murders, they're all priced a little higher than a normal comic. They're at about $5, 40% off at DCB service. And so the sense I'm getting from this, and I know this is something that Hickman's been interested in, especially since the Dying and the Dead, that he doesn't want to be constrained by the 22 or 20 page chapters of normal monthly comics, that he wants his chapters to be able to, in a sense, breathe and be as long as they need to be. I think this works very well for what Hickman wants to do anyway, because one of the things I hear from people when I talk to them about something like East of West or Manhattan Projects is that people say, I really like reading this book on a monthly basis, except that I have to know that 2 or 3 pages of each issue is going to be taken up with just the kind of opening title sequence that's like a 2-page spread that has design elements on it but doesn't have any story information. And so this extra page format lets Hickman and Coker not only kind of tell a longer chapter, but it lets Hickman deal with those kind of design elements and text pages that he likes to deal with. So there's a lot of text pages in this book that give us some extra information about the world we're getting into, what the structure of this organization is, what the history is of it, and then other information about some of the characters we see.
Right. Yeah, there are a number of text-based pages, and sometimes when I see those in comics, I wonder, is this information that could have been relayed in comic form? In other words, is the text necessary? With Black Monday Murders, I think they add to the storytelling experience, and so I'm fine with them. And also, you mentioned the design element, which adds to the page count. This is something that we've discussed a number of times anytime we bring up a Jonathan Hickman title, is the design-heavy feel of the book. And I think that's a big plus. It's something that defines a Jonathan Hickman comic. I like this. As it applies to the point that you made about Hickman wanting, extra space to breathe, to come out with the kind of story that he wants to tell and in the way that he wants to tell it. I mean, I'm glad that he does that, and I guess the most recent example of this is The Dying and the Dead. Now, the potential downside to this, and I have heard readers of Hickman or fans of readers say this, at least with The Dying and the Dead, that they wish the titles came out a little more frequently than they do. So I guess it's kind of a trade-off, right? If you want to do something a little different in terms of page count and frequency, then for the creator, something like this is good. But I think that readers have to understand that they're not going to get a monthly or even a bi-monthly comic like they're used to. But I'm okay with that.
Right. Well, I think there's something else going on here with Image that is worth noting, and that is now from what I understand from talking to other people who are working for Image, not Hickman, that Image has recently started a new policy in which 3 issues have to be in the can before a book can be solicited.
Okay.
So with
so we're assuming that there are 3 completed issues of Black Monday Murders already.
Yeah, at least.
Right.
Right. And so I think that's a great policy for Image to get behind. Now, that makes it difficult, I think, for creators, especially artists, because basically you're doing 60 to however many pages this book's going to be every month. 60 to 150 pages or whatever without getting paid. Mm-hmm. Because of the way Image operates. So, that may change things a lot at Image, but I think from a consumer's standpoint, it's better, right, to have stuff come out consistently. And I know that with The Dying and the Dead, Hickman and the artist Ryan Bodenheimer are working on getting on a regular schedule with that.
Okay. Yeah. Even if at least 3 issues are already completed, they're awaiting publication, then Hickman and Coker are going to nonetheless have to time those according to what they anticipate in terms of the time for future issues.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So it's not like the first 3 issues are going to come out one each month, because if they do that, then once they exhaust what they already have in the can, it's going to take longer. It's going to disappoint readers. In other words, they're going to have to set up readers' expectations on, I guess, something like they did with Dying and the Dead.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we've talked about, the page length and the frequency of The Dying and the Dead, and a little bit about what's inside. But we haven't really talked much about the story of this number 1 issue. Now, you did mention that it starts off in 1929 on the day of the stock market crash. It brings us into more contemporary times. To me, one of the complexity that's part of the density of this series, or what seems to be in the series with this first issue, is this system, this organization that Hickman has set up that is behind these banks. Now, in more contemporary times, we have an investment bank by the name of, I guess you pronounce it, Cankren, and it's supposed to be a combination of Western banking practices, the Cana part of that name, and then Eastern banking practices, Cankren. So, here we have something like East and West here in Black Monday Murders. But then there's a system to the setup of this organization that there's always a watcher, an ascendant, a scales, and a stone chair. And each of those positions assume certain responsibilities. And we begin in 1929 with the fall of the market, and the individual who currently has the stone chair position, someone named Charles Ackerman, he buys it. But he does so because he just happened to have that position of the stone chair at the time of the crash, and that's one of the things that happens. Whoever assumes that role at the time of economic catastrophe, when there's a downturn in the market, he's extinguished, or he or she is extinguished. It just happens to be Ackerman when the story opens. That is the system of watcher, ascendant, scale, stone chair is something that has the most promise in terms of density. I think there's a lot of story in there that Hickman can tease out, but it's just lightly touched upon in this first issue in such a way that it left me wanting to know more in a good way.
Right. In the timeline he hints at different kind of catastrophic events that have happened to this group.
Actual historic market movement.
Yes, and internal conflicts that have taken place as well. one of which includes this merger with the Eastern Bank that you mentioned. There appears to be at one point one of the families is wiped out or nearly wiped out, and so the series has kind of room to expand backwards in time, give us some of these stories, or to kind of leave them out and leave them mysteries. But there's a lot of possibility within just some of those text pages that we see. There's a lot of possibilities for more stories to get expanded upon. But after the 1929 section, we move to the present. It says October 2016, so that's actually a couple months away from now. But and that's where this more recent murder has taken place, and there we meet another one, probably going to be one of the main characters, a detective named Theo Dumas, I guess.
Yeah, it could be either Dumas or Dumas, depending on whether it's Franco pronunciation.
Yes, and he has, and it appears that he's been involved in investigating this organization for a while, and may himself even have some kind of supernatural ability to see or sense somebody that's a part of this organization.
Right.
But he also seems to be a really good detective. Mm-hmm. And so when he's analyzing the crime scene, he finds a bunch of things that the original investigators had not recognized.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, it's the character of Detective Dumas who... We get enough of him in this first issue, but he's someone who very much intrigues me. So I'm intrigued by the setup of the organization behind the investment bank, but I'm equally as intrigued and very much wanting to know more about Detective Dumas. And so I think that the way that this was written in this very long first issue, Hickman did an outstanding job of giving us not too much information, but leaving us wanting more, in a good way. And you would think that in such a long issue that he would have packed much more information into the series premise, or regarding the series premise. But no, I love the way that this first issue turned out.
Yeah, Theo is an interesting character. He's in this mold of the kind of hyper competent detective that we see in a lot of fiction. And in a lot of comic mystery series as well. And I think of characters that, for example, that Warren Ellis tends to write. But there's also something else going on with him, and he's yet another story that has potential to be told later on. Is what has gotten him. When we first meet him, he's suspended or on desk duty, I guess, because of a shooting he committed during what was, I guess, a routine traffic stop or something, in which he killed somebody after saying, I can see you, or something to that effect. And then it turned out this person was a horrible serial killer. Yeah. So the police department doesn't seem to know what to do with him, and so he's on desk duty, and yet they know when a certain kind of crime comes up like this one that he's the only person that can handle the job. Right.
We also get a little bit of information about members of the family who seems to be overseeing the Cana Cancrin bank right now, and that is the Rothschild. Now, the person who is killed that Detective Dumas is called to the scene to investigate is Daniel Rothschild. Now, Daniel Rothschild is a relative of the 1929's Milton Rothschild, who was the ascendant, and the ascendant is, if I read it correctly, the member of this foursome who wields the power. The Watcher is someone who looks to see what the conditions are surrounding the market and can see when something is going to happen. The Scales, I guess that's the individual who assumes some kind of critical or judicial kind of reading of the context. And then the stone chair is the one who's actually responsible, right? The one anchored to the earth. And in each of these, the Watcher Ascendant, the Scales, and the stone chair has a link to earth, wind, fire, air, or water. So Raymond Dominic, you mentioned a family in Hickman's history about this bank. It's the Dominic family, I think, that was almost entirely eliminated. And Raymond Dominic was the Scales in 1929. Rothschild, though, that's the family that seems to be in ascendance now. Both an ascendant in 1929, but the one who has the power in more contemporary times. And so Daniel is killed, but his sister Gregoria Rothschild is called in to take his place, and she seems to be a quite interesting character, let's say.
Yeah, so it looks like the series is likely to follow at least two parallel lines in the present day. One is Theo's investigation of this murder, and another is the internal conflicts and so on that are going to go on between these four families, or the families that are running this investment bank and organization. And so we'll get to see both the insides of that organization as well as what it looks like from the outside, from the detective's point of view. But yeah, I mean, after reading this issue and after actually rereading it a couple times, I really enjoyed it. I'm going to keep on with this in single issues. I feel like it's a book that I keep wanting to read more. I'm looking forward to the next issue so much that I'd rather not wait for the trade.
Right. I think that, one of the things you get from waiting for the trade is a more complete story. So many of the questions that you and I have after reading issue number 1 would be, if not answered, then at least partially addressed in the trade. On the other hand, I agree with you. This is one of those series that my experience reading the first issue, if the next issues are anything like this first issue, then this serial form of consuming the story is going to be fun.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Well, let's turn to the next title, which actually is even more genre-bending than the Black Monday Murders, and this is Greg Pak and Mirko Colak's Kingsway West from Dark Horse Comics.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to pair this book with a Hickman book because the world that Kingsway West inhabits, and so it's a kind of supernatural Western. But in a world, in a kind of alternative history where basically in the 19th century the Asians or the Chinese control the American West Coast, and they're at war with the Mexicans who
control the southwestern part.
Yeah, control the southwestern part, and they're fighting over something called red gold, basically, which is has these supernatural properties. But when I saw this kind of this 19th century alternative history in which different factions that didn't originally control these parts of the U.S. now do, I thought immediately of East of West,
right,
and the way that book divides up the United States. And so I think there's a lot of potential for that kind of alternative history, and mixing it in also then with supernatural elements.
Mm-hmm. Now, Pak and Colak at the very beginning of this first issue gives us a one-page setup which includes a map, which I found very useful.
Right.
And it mentions someone by the name of Dr. Arnold Uhrmacher. And at first, I kind of read over that name, didn't know what to make of it, and then after I got into page 2 and 3, completely forgot about it. Now, Ermacher appears at the very end of this issue, so I think that's a really clever way of setting something up where the payoff for that name, at least, is at the very end of this first issue. But it gives us a little background in terms of the red gold and the contentious relationship between the Chinese Queen of Golden City, and the Chinese forces that control the northern western part of the North American coast, and the Mexican-ruled República de los Californios. A little history there. So it gives us a sense of what to expect, and it even tells us that this took place in the early half of the 1860s, but then the story proper begins in 1861 in Northern California, and here we are introduced to our main character, Kingsway Law.
Right.
And that's his last name, Law. But he's not a lawman.
Right.
As far as we know.
Correct. And Kingsway Law is, has I guess a mysterious past, but he's also he's trying to get past, I guess, the war that has recently taken place, and part of his motivation for that is that he has fallen in love and later married a Mexican woman, and so there's the kind of Romeo and Juliet, I guess, kind of setup where two people from opposing factions, normally enemies, fall in love and then want to live outside of that that conflict.
Right, and they seem to be quite successful at doing this because, once we get into the second half of this first issue, it takes place 5 years after the first meeting between Kingsway Law and Sonia, the Mexican, who eventually becomes his wife, and then Kingsway meets another character, and she is from, well, at least she's Chinese or of Chinese descent, but she is not a part of the Queen of the Golden Cities regime. Now, do they give her name at all? Did I miss it?
I can't remember.
And she's gone in search of Kingsway.
Right.
But Kingsway, when she comes across him, doesn't claim to be Kingsway. He says,
right.
I don't know who he is. But this woman has a dragon by her side that can smell something that was a part of someone and then find that individual. So this woman has shell casings that apparently Kingsway Law had used. The dragon sniffs it, but he doesn't point to Kingsway.
Right.
That brings in other forces, other complications. I think that this first issue, which is regularly sized, right? And we were talking about Black Monday Murders being well over 50 pages. This is containable in about 20-some. But I think there is a lot put into this first issue. It sets up a lot of questions. We know toward the end that something has happened to Kingsway's wife, Sonia, but we don't know what. She's probably not dead, but he doesn't know that. And that becomes the motivation for him to make the decisions that he will make. But then also we get a little more information in the second half of this first issue about red gold. And the relationship of this Chinese woman who is looking for Kingsway to red gold.
Right, exactly. And some of the things you mentioned in there point to what I like a lot about this. I like a lot about this book. On one hand, Pak is relying on some common tropes of the Western genre, especially. I mean, the Kingsway Law is a reluctant gunfighter. The guy's really, really good at what he does, but he doesn't want to do it. He wants to retire and get out of it, and he's pulled back in to that world. But one of the conventions of that genre, too, is what will often pull the gunfighter back in is that his domestic life is destroyed, and his especially by having, say, his wife and children murdered.
Right.
Here, we at least get the hint that Sophia is not dead, and that she probably has, as strong a survival skills as her husband. So I'm glad that Sophia wasn't brought into this story only to be the kind of vehicle for his for Kingsway's return to the violent life.
Yeah, and then we get on the last 2 pages of this first issue, the introduction of this character that I mentioned a little while ago, Dr. Arnold Uhrmacher. And he's doing something. We don't know exactly what. There is another character, a woman with wings. We don't know what the hell's going on with her. In other words, these last 2 pages open a number of other questions about this series, but again, in a very good way. I think a fine line to walk with number 1 issues, how many questions do you want to leave unanswered that will still give the reader a sense of a complete first issue? And not everyone can pull that off. I think, as we were discussing, Hickman definitely did this with the Black Monday Murders, but I feel that Pak does the same thing with Kingsway West. There are a lot of complications that occur throughout this first issue, especially in those last 2 pages with the mysteries that we have here. But I'm definitely wanting to find out ASAP what happens next.
Yeah, that's true. And those final pages not only introduce us to Dr. Uhrmacher, or reintroduce us to him, I guess, but also set up the fact that there is a third, nation, I guess, involved in this conflict.
The United States of New York.
Exactly. So that idea, I like that twist at the end as well. No, I think one of the things you're getting at in your last comment is one of the things I really liked about this book, which is Pak's ability at world building. I mean, on top of the world building, there's enough kind of genre conventions that he is utilizing that make it familiar, but also then he's twisting on those conventions. So he's setting up a complex world, but he's also giving us some kind of familiar space to latch onto in that complex world so that it is not overwhelming with information. And I think, as you said, balancing out the mysteries so that we're not completely confused and we want to read the next issue.
Exactly. Now, when I read this first issue, I was assuming that there would be more historical accuracy going on. I wasn't. I didn't know as much, I guess, as you did about what kind of story this was, and how it is kind of an alternate history in many ways.
Yeah.
So I think there was the potential danger of beginning this story world in such a way where there are few, if no, markers, right? Mm-hmm. But the look of this, if you did not know the detail and you just quickly flipped through this first issue, it would look like, a regular Western. The way that the people are dressed, the way that they're interacting, the environment that they're in very much looks like the American West of the 1860s. That we're used to, right, that actually took place. It's just that in this world, the contexts are different, the political socio systems are very different. But Pak gives us enough to go on, and I think he does a great job at this. This is another good title that I want to continue on on a monthly basis.
Yeah, I agree with that too. The first issue cover has the tagline "Old West, New Magic."
Yeah,
and I think that's a good forward elevator pitch for this book. But you're right. I think there's a lot of potential here for some fun comics in a way that, like, for example, that I wish I had stuck with The Sixth Gun from the beginning. I had read the first few issues and then had to catch up with it later when I decided I really wanted to get back into it. I feel like this is a series I want to stick with from the beginning.
Yeah, I did. I think I kept up with the first 3 volumes of The Sixth Gun and then just got out of the habit of reading it. So.
Yeah. I mean, and I bought the first few issues as they came out, and then moved into reading it, I guess, digitally. But even then took a while to get back into it and get caught up. So, Yeah, so this was a book I want to get on from the beginning.
Well, the third title that we're discussing this week is from Oni Press. It is Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth. This is written and drawn by Joshua Hale Fialkov and Tony Fleece. Now, is that name pronounced Fleece or Fleecs?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Fleecs.
Exactly. So it could be either. And I'm definitely familiar with Josh Fialkov's work, which, we've talked about him a number of times on the podcast, but not the work of Tony Fleece, if that's how you pronounce his name. Although on the first page, or the cover of this first issue, we do have some context. It says, from the writer of The Bunker and the artist of, wait, My Little Pony? Okay, whatever. So apparently Tony Fleece is the artist of My Little Pony.
Yeah, and I think the kind of abstract and humorous art style that would be required for My Little Pony works well for this, even though this is definitely not aimed at the same audience as My Little Pony.
It's definitely got more of an edge to it, but it's not so edgy that a young reader would be in danger of losing his or her innocence reading this.
Sure.
Unlike the last title we're going to discuss this week.
Yeah, I guess. And the last title has even more potential. Someone who is a young reader to seek out, to be familiar with James Kochalka from, say, Johnny Boo or something like that, and then out super fuckers.
Warrior,
But anyway, so Jeff Steinberg is a kind of, I don't know, a kind of loser that we very often see in comedies, but he is in the current day he is working at a video store, so we already know that he's in in an industry that's pretty much already dead, let alone dying. But in the first few pages of this book, he appears to have done something a little while ago that he's waiting on the results of,
and people are betting on,
and people are
when
betting
it will
on.
happen,
right? And this was a little confusing to me, but to get it straight, he did something where he ate glue and then ate something really bad for him, and he's waiting to poop. Is that it? Am I right about that?
I think you are, and I'm glad that you raised the question that sits at the very center of this first issue, and that is the quote-unquote mystery behind him being chosen by these aliens, which we'll talk about in a moment. I'm with you. I thought it wasn't as clear as it could have been exactly what it was that Jeff Steinberg did that made him, at least in the aliens' eyes, special in some way. I got the sense, because I guess we're halfway through this first issue, and we get a little backstory. In fact, the backstory takes place 18 days, 16 hours, and 14 minutes and 38 seconds before this first issue actually begins. And apparently, this is the way I read it, Jeff drinks just a big old bottle of Elmer's glue in order to get a free dinner at Shakey's Pizza, because he says that he says, and this is halfway through this first issue, that he'll do it as long as you take him out for all you can eat buffet at Shakey's, and then he drinks the glue. So I don't think it was eating the glue and then eating that was the project. It was, I will eat all this glue if you buy me dinner. But the result of that is he's constipated. And that's what people are betting on, and that's what he's waiting on, how long it will take him to actually poop. And when he finally does this, the same day that this Intergalactic Council of Planetary Relations come to Earth, they're choosing someone who is not necessarily the strongest, not the mightiest, but someone who has the most willpower. And so I guess this alien planetary council sees his holding off defecating with willpower. And so right after he defecates, then they choose him.
See, that's the willpower I was getting was that he is, at the moment that they are seeking somebody out, he is concentrating so hard on being able to go to the bathroom because it's been 18 days since he pooped.
Oh, okay.
And so he is just straining at the toilet, and that is where his willpower is showing to be greater than anyone else's on Earth. So it's the coincidence of him trying to push out this turd, I guess, through the glue, and it turns out to be a tiny one that gets him chosen. Now, I'm not you and I are both doctors, but we're not medical doctors.
Nope.
So I don't know exactly how long.
And we don't play one on TV.
No, I don't know exactly how long one can go without pooping. 18 days seems like a long time to go without pooping because, as Jeff says at one point, I think after a week or so, he says it's got to go somewhere. And so, I would assume that he had kind of maybe a nasty intestinal infection after this, or something, or sepsis. I don't know. something would have burst, one would think, after 18 days. But anyway, plus, what kind of friends does he have that dare him to eat a whole bottle of glue?
Right. Well, one of the friends who works with him at the what is it called, Hollywood Express video store, is a guy named Rollo, and he seems to be a real piece of work. I mean, he's someone who would, definitely the kind of guy who would bet on a friend or against a friend in order to make a buck and have a good laugh, regardless of his friend's health.
Right.
Because he's always, we don't see him much in this first issue, but whenever we see him, he's always wisecracking or making kind of a selfish observation. But he's kind of a likable asshole, kind of like a George Costanza.
Yep.
And in fact, I don't know if you felt this, but Jeff Steinberg almost had a kind of Seinfeld-like feel to it, in that you get a group of people who don't seem to have much going on. Again, a story about nothing, although Fialkov definitely upends that, because this definitely becomes a story about something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, one of the questions I wanted to ask you about this book is, did you ever go to a Shakey's Pizza?
When I was a kid, yeah, we had them in Charlotte.
Okay, I don't know if Shakey's is still a going concern. I could probably look that up, but yeah, I mean Shakey's was a big part of my childhood.
Yeah, and did they play old movies, shorts at your Shakey's?
I don't remember that.
Oh, God, I remember that, because we would eat in this kind of large room that would have a screen in it, and we would see these old – they were soundies. I remember it would be something like Three Stooges or Laurel and Hardy. And so when I think of Shakey's, at least growing up, I think of old movies, old comedies.
Yeah, and in looking it up online, at Shakey's Pizza does still exist. I don't know where. I wonder where their locations are, because I don't see them around here. But
if our listeners have experience with Shakey's, get in touch with us and let us know if your Shakey's had old movies.
Yeah, yeah, and so he's trying to get this Shakey's out of him, and so just as he's he's released this tiny poop that does come out. He's broadcast on television worldwide on every channel at the toilet with his pants pulled down, and then he is teleported onto the alien ship, where he is told that he is now the champion of Earth, and he has to go through these trials in order to save the Earth. And he's on on worldwide television without any pants on, and so everybody then gets comments on his penis size. It's the end of the world. They say we're all doomed. The guy with a tiny dick has doomed us all.
We're laughing here. To me, okay, there are two kinds of Joshua Hale Fialkovs, right? There is the kind of Fialkov that we get in Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth, and this is the same Fialkov from Punks. And I love that Fialkov. But I also really enjoy the more serious Fialkov, the Fialkov that we get with The Bunker and Tumor, a book that we discussed a few years ago. In fact, they're coming out with a new deluxe hardcover edition of Tumor. This is definitely the over-the-top humorous side of Josh Fialkov. So if you're someone who absolutely loved Punks, and I do, then you're going to like this. Not only in the way that Fialkov writes the main character and then his friends like Rollo, but in the final pages, I think this has to be one of my favorite parts of this first issue is what happens in Washington, D.C. during this alien visitation.
Yeah.
And we get President Obama along with his ready room, the generals, chief of staff, and all that. And the way that Fialkov writes and then the way that Fleecs draws Obama, I think is hilarious. It makes fun of him, but in a respectful way.
Yeah. And I think it's an interesting twist that President Obama has Jeff Steinberg's back. You know, he believes that an ordinary schlub like Jeff Steinberg is going to step up and be capable of saving the world. And,
that's right.
And in looking at the solicitations for later issues, it appears that President Obama is going to be a regular character in the series. That's
interesting because in the closing pages of this first issue, Obama is pulling for Jeff to be able to do what he's able to do. And he says, come on, boys. Yes, he can. Yes. And so he leads the Joint Chiefs of Staff as saying, yes, he can. Yes, he can. And as the comic Obama here mentions, let's go back to something that was successful for me 8 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. And in fact, you do get an Obama who is on his way out. And he makes a comment about people think that he's a lame duck, but he's not really.
Right.
And so this is interesting, especially if he's going to play out this Obama character in subsequent issues. This is interesting. A friend of ours and a co-host on the Comics Alternative, Gwen Tarbox, has recently written an essay for something that I'm working on where she's looking at representation of Obama in comics. Mm-hmm. Now, this is coming out after she finished that essay, but it just strikes me that the way that Fialkov is writing Obama here would be a great way for her to maybe put in an epilogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or a footnote.
Yeah. Uh-huh. So now, is this something that you're going to continue reading on a monthly basis?
I don't know. I'm a little bit up in the air about it. I think this one of the things we haven't mentioned is this is a really long first issue too. Mm-hmm. It's about 50 pages, and unlike the Black Monday Murders, I don't feel like it needed to be 50 pages long, especially the long protracted opening sequence where we get so many people, so many different people that Jeff knows talking about his. When this thing is going to happen that they've been waiting on, which we find out later is the pooping. I feel like that didn't need to be as long as it was, in order to get the point across. And so, I liked the humor in this book. I did laugh again, especially my favorite part being kind of what you said, the representation of President Obama. So I'm curious. I may give it another couple issues, but I'm on the fence right now.
Well, we're at the stage of this week's show. We're going to be looking at the very last title, And this is Superfuckers Forever, issue number 1 by James Kochalka. Now, you've probably realized that this is definitely an explicit episode of the Comics Alternative, and it's out of necessity. Andy and I thought that we could, instead of saying Superfuckers, say Super Effers. But that would in many ways go against the spirit of Kochalka's Superfuckers.
Yeah.
Because if you're familiar with this title, then either the comic or even the YouTube video, you know that not only is the name right there in your face, but the characters, their situations, the scenarios, their language, Kochalka doesn't pull back at all.
Right. And did you read the original Superfuckers?
Yes, I did. And then have seen not all, but I've seen most of the videos on YouTube.
Okay. Yeah, I haven't seen any of those, but I did read the first one. And I think if someone were coming to this without having read that first issue or the first graphic novel, I think it might be a little bit difficult to follow.
You think so?
Especially in figuring out characters like what's his name? Jack
Crack.
Jack Crack, yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the relationships. Some characters are just kind of brought in and not really explained, at least not until you get to the end where you get the kind of cast of characters and who they are.
That's a good point. And I'm glad that Kochalka put that last page in there where you do have the characters and a brief description of the who they are. I'm wondering, though, if he would have been better served by putting this at the very beginning of this issue.
Right. If there was an inside front cover or something. Exactly.
Now, you would still come into this, if you weren't familiar with either the earlier comics or the YouTube videos, without knowing some of the situations here. So, for instance, at the very beginning, we see the characters Vortex and Grotessa in this bubble. And Grotessa is saying, well, where are we? What's going on? And Vortex explains, well, we're kind of shielded against this breakdown of reality in this bubble. Now, if you're familiar with the earlier comics, and by the way, those earlier comics ran from 2005 to 2007, or the YouTube videos, because the YouTube videos follow loosely the original comics from about, 8 years ago, not completely, but roughly. But you would know that, at least I think it's the very last issue of Superfuckers. And by the way, the Superfuckers the earlier stories have been collected in book form. I think you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Vortex, how to explain this? He had a chamber, and he captured a moment in his past. And he would keep guard over this vacuumed time chamber of him in the past. And he couldn't let the present intrude into his little time chamber, because if he did, then there would be a complete annihilation of future and present, or past and present. And that's what actually happens in the last Superfucker story. Mm-hmm. And then that's why we get Grotessa and Vortex in this bubble shielding them. But again, you wouldn't know why they're in this bubble unless you were familiar with the videos or the earlier. But I'm wondering if people coming to this for the first time without having seen those earlier comics or videos would just say, okay, I may be missing something here, but I can still appreciate and enjoy the story.
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll have to, but I mean, I think that they should probably. I mean, maybe if they're motivated enough, maybe interested in getting than that previous series, but or looking at the YouTube videos. I do like, though, and I think that the idea of what has happened here, that Vortex has to basically can recreate the universe or whatever after the events of the previous series, but really what he wants to do is just be with Grotessa in this time bubble and make out with her, and then can't, of course. Then he's got they've got to go. They got to go back, and meanwhile, back in, I guess, normal reality, Jack Crack and the other members of the Superfuckers are having a conversation about Jack Crack missing his vagina. And so this appears to be the major crisis that he's facing.
Which makes, it makes no sense that
Right.
Jack Crack is missing his vagina. He's a male. But then he starts talking about his wieners in plural. And, his friends are high-fiving. They say, dude, you rule. You got multiple dicks. And the language that we're using is the language that Kachanka uses in Superfuckers Forever. And as you pointed out a moment ago, if our listeners are familiar with Kachanka's work primarily through, let's say, Johnny Boo stories or the Glorkian Warrior stories, this is a very, very different kind of Kachanka. And to me, this is the more exciting kind of Kachanka. I like the innocent stuff that he writes, going all the way back to American Elf. But I like the kind of weird, twisted humor that we find in not only Superfuckers, but in other titles that we've discussed on the show in the past. For instance, Fungus, The Unbearable Rot of Being.
Right.
That was a Big Planet retrofit book.
Yeah, right. So it turns out that Jack Crack's vagina that he's looking for isn't actually a vagina. It's a rip in the space-time continuum that happens to be located in, what's the character's name, Wonder Dan?
Or Kyle. Wonder
Kyle, yeah, Kyle's butt.
On his butt.
And so Jack Crack has to reach in here and pull out Super Dan. Yeah.
So Super Dan comes out from a crack in Wonder Kyle's ass.
Well, yeah, in a crack in the space-time continuum.
Which is on his ass,
yeah,
so, yeah.
Okay, down. Right. And so, let's see. And so...
yeah, where do you go from that?
In addition to... in addition to that main story, which we're not quite sure where that's going to go. It doesn't end on a huge cliffhanger. Really, it's just the, Super Dan returns from Dimension Zero, and that's the end of that first story. So we don't really know yet if the issue is going to pick up, or if the next issue is going to pick up right where this left off and continue an ongoing narrative, or if it's going to be shorter narratives. But one other aspect of this first issue too that Kachalka explains in the back cover is going to be a regular feature is that each issue will also have a backup tale by a different indie creator, and this issue's is by Jake Lawrence, who has a story called Swear Jar, which is actually pretty funny.
It is. It's really good. And that's great. You mentioned where the next issue may pick up, or if it's going to pick up where the first issue left off. I don't know that it necessarily needs to do that, because one of the things about the original Superfuckers comics is that, there was a sense of continuity, but it was extremely loose continuity. So it was more... comedic situation that may or may not be linked one with the other. And so that's what I'm expecting for this new Superfuckers Forever series. And we should also point out that this is different from the original Superfuckers, not only with the new story by an indie creator with each issue, but this is the first time that we're going to get Superfuckers monthly.
Right.
And I don't think we mentioned, but this is an IDW title.
That's right. Now it's being solicited as a 5-issue miniseries.
Oh, so it's a miniseries. It's going to be,
but it seems to be saying on the back of the book that this is a regular series and their first ever monthly comic book series. So I don't know if it's going to be a series of miniseries in the sense of like what Mike Mignola used to do with BPRD, for example.
Right.
So that even though that was coming out relatively on a monthly basis, it was still a series of miniseries. Or if it's going to be just the 5 issues. But we'll see. But it'll be worth checking out anyway.
Yeah, I definitely hope it's more than just 5 issues, because there are a lot of these characters, the Superfucker characters, that we've yet to see or see significantly, and I'm waiting for Shitstorm. Yeah, now Shitstorm is, let me see, the origin of Shitstorm is a robot that was made for a creature named Grotus, who is this slimy, gross, smelly creature, and Wonder Kyle developed this robot's body in order to interact with Grotus, to give him more free movement and speech. But what happens is that Jack Crack takes a dump in the robot, and his feces become sentient, giving life to this robot. And so then the robot becomes Shitstorm.
Yep.
Again, it's juvenile humor. It makes no sense. It's a very in-your-face, gross at times, but fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
You're going to be offended, and so Kachalka, who can be very cute, and he's known for his cute style, but you're going to be offended by this. Right.
And I think, I think there's a lot to look forward to in this series as well. One of the things that I'm looking forward to actually in the third issue, which is the one that the most recently solicited, Box Brown is doing the backup story.
Oh, that's good.
And I think Box Brown's work, his art style melds well with Kachalka's.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you mentioned Box Brown, because we should also point out that Kachalka just recently had another book from Retrofit Big Planet, Elf Cat in Love.
Right, and that's a fun book.
It is, and it's one of those that's kind of in between the kind of in-your-face grossness and obscenity of Superfuckers and the cuteness that you would find, all-age cuteness, in Glorkian Warrior or Johnny Boo. It's kind of in between.
Right.
Well, Andy, we had a lot on our plate genre-wise. We started off with Jonathan Hickman and Tomm Coker's The Black Monday Murders. We followed that up with a discussion of Kingsway West #1, written by Greg Pak with art by Mirko Colak. Then we went to Joshua Hale Fialkov and Tony Fleece's Jeff Steinberg, Champion of Earth. And then we wrapped up, obscenely enough, with James Kalchanka's Superfuckers Forever #1.
Yeah, that's a wide range of stuff, but four good #1 issues that we got this month.
Yeah, I'm glad we got around to talking about all of those. And there were more #1s that we were interested in bringing on the show, but that would have made this extra long.
Yes. So if you want to find the next issues in the series, you would do well to visit the website of our sponsor, Discount Comic Book Service. As Andy pointed out at the top of the show, currently issue #3 of these series are being solicited now, so you can get them at great discounts. That's dcbservice.com. Go there for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, get in touch with us and let us know what you think about the titles we discussed this week. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message through the comfort of your own computer using SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 415-3-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427. That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com. And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can also find us on Twitter. We're at the number 2 guys with PhDs. That's right, but you can find us elsewhere in the social media sphere on Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube.
You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. You can listen to the podcast via Spotify, and if you're an Android user, on Google Play Music. But you can find every single one of our podcast episodes, as well as the reviews and the comics-related commentary that we post on our blog, by going to our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
Yep, that's all the ways to get a hold of us. Let us know how we're doing, and talk to us about whatever you're interested in.
Yeah, so be like Bob Hodges. Get in touch with us, send us email, tweet out to us, mention something to us on Facebook, because we like hearing from you guys.
Yep.
That's right. And next week we will be back with our September preview show. Until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.
We're always in our clubhouse getting high. And everybody wishes we would die.